a blue Ford Escort that was surrounded by pretty much complete devastation and right next to cars that were completely burned out. However, there is one particular video which I took a screenshot of where the hazard lights were still blinking on the car. So it indicated that not only was the electrical system of the car still functioning, but it could probably have been started and driven away as well. So the fact that that survived so well in that environment kind of indicates to me that the blue definitely had something to do with it.
Welcome back to the Made You Think Show, episode 10, Anomalous Fires with Shane Buell. So I didn't come to the topic of anomalous fires through theory. I came here through evidence, what didn't behave the way it was supposed to. See, years ago, I discovered the work of Dr. Judy Wood, especially her documentation of 9/11. That's 9/11, 2001. All these weird anomalous melted vehicles, many, many blocks away from ground zero of the main destruction. Instances of unburnt paper near actual fires that were going on. That's on video. Selective destruction and temperatures that didn't line up with conventional fire behavior. So that opened a door that I never really closed. And then came Paradise, California. Same patterns, similar melted cars, same inconsistencies. Around that time, I started seeing raw, uncensored footage on YouTube, including breakdowns from Jake the Asshole. That's an interesting YouTube channel, laying out the anomalies that no official report seemed to want to touch. Then Maui happened. Now that's hitting a lot closer to home because here I am on the big island of Hawaii, one island away. Like I drive sometimes to go to my staycations on the other side, and on my way driving, I see part of Maui. Suddenly, this is not a fringe topic. Independent media flooded TikTok. Locals filmed in real time. Forensic arborists started weighing in, explaining that vegetation, brush fires, and even structural fires do not reach temperatures high enough to melt aluminum, steel components, automobile glass. That takes a very high temperature. I believe it's like 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And engine blocks not happening the way we were seeing it happened. And that's when all the threads connected. So this is why I reconnected with my friend Shane Buell, someone I've known from our time co-hosting the Freedom Fiends radio and podcast. Shane is now one of the authors of Sound the Alarm. Gonna hold up the book here. Just got the book and didn't have, unfortunately, the time to read it ahead of time, but Shane is here to walk through what he's found, what doesn't add up, why these fires deserve serious scrutiny. So, Shane Buell first learned of the Maui fire from a childhood friend whose family, the Kamakas, are from Lahaina. Shane had a lifelong interest in physics and chemistry and first suspected the use of directed energy in 2018 after seeing the aftermath of the Paradise, California fire. So, after seeing the unusual damage, roadblocks, and the resulting land grab over on Maui, it lit a fire in him to carry a torch of truth and try to stop it on Maui and elsewhere. Shane, welcome to the Made You Think show. Worms! How's your day over there?
Worms. Good, thank you. This is the Freedom Fiends, broadcasting live from Pod Bay 2A, a mile above sea level at Intergalactic Prairie Studios. We alter your locus ceruleus by warming your synapses with rejuvenative radio waves. This warms your brain to a tasty and toasty 420 degrees Fahrenheit to keep a sin flood of statism out of your head. Can you feel it, Daryl?
I can feel it, Shane. And that is what it sounded like when we were doing the Freedom Fiends radio show and podcast over what was the what was the link up? Because right now we're using Riverside, but back then we were using
Fiend Phone. Michael
Fiend
Fiend
Phone.
had actually created his own program, which to this day I haven't seen a streaming service that actually sounds as good as Fiend Phone did.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And I gave my side of it, like how like from 9/11 and finding Dr. Judy Wood's work, stepping into it, then the Paradise Fires, and then really hitting close to home. By the time Lahaina was anomalously on fire, there was TikTok. Whereas for the Paradise Fire, I don't remember being like seeing like TikTok style videography, like actual like independent investigative journalism and reporting going on like that way. But it sure was, regarding what I mentioned, Jake the Asshole on YouTube. So from your time co-hosting Freedom Fiends, what originally pulled you into investigating anomalous fires, rather than say conventional political or economic corruption?
Right. Well, I still have an interest in investigating conventional political and economic corruption. But I guess a little background was I was raised as a Star Trek fan. And so I guess I was always interested in the possibility of directed energy as a kid. And I did go to space camp. There was no directed energy involvement there, unfortunately. I wish I would have gotten some training on that. But I did follow directed energy in the 1980s during the Star Wars initiative, the SDI. I know in 1987 they had tried to downplay it and said that it wasn't ready for, battlefield use. And so they basically went underground. They pretty much stopped funding it publicly. But then around 2016, I believe, they accelerated the funding for directed energy and directed energy weapons. And I didn't actually catch back onto it again until about late 2018, early 2019, when photos of the Paradise Fire started to circulate. And so when I saw some of those, what I would call anomalies, because it doesn't look like natural fire behavior, the melted glass and the aluminum, were things that kind of stuck out to me. Now, aluminum can melt at 1221 degrees, and some woods can burn up to 1472. However, you would have to have like a wood pile of like the right kind of pine underneath the aluminum rim in order to actually reach that temperature. And a lot of times we see aluminum rims that are melting in empty parking lots and so forth with little to no fuel around the rim. And then, like you said, auto glass takes about 2,500 degrees, and porcelain, which is sometimes also missing in these fires, takes about 3,000 plus. So, yeah, that's what tipped me off at the beginning of the Paradise Fire, but it didn't really motivate me to take like a super deep dive and make it like part of my life's work to actually expose this until the Maui fire happened. And when I saw the images of Lahaina, it looked like there were so many anomalous fire behavior, damage indicators that to me just seemed like they could not be produced by natural fire. And so I started looking into it, and there was a lot of anomalies that seemed to indicate something other than normal fire behavior. Now, I'm not going to say that I know specifically, which platform or what type of energy it is, but we can actually examine the evidence and try to eliminate some of the possibilities based on what we know about directed energy.
It sounds like you already covered what did not sit right regarding the fires in Lahaina or Paradise, or I would mention even the recent LA fires, which are interesting. And I want to pivot over to there to LA. Did you look into the LA fires, the Los Angeles fires?
Very heavily, yes, I did.
It's about what didn't sit right regarding the Los Angeles fires of 2020,
I believe that was
25,
early 2025. I think it was the first
or
week of January 2025.
almost 1 year ago.
A little over a year now. Yeah, about 13 months now.
Yeah. And what didn't sit right there?
Well, what didn't sit right there for me was so I had been already reporting on fires. So after the Maui fire, I started working with Tracy Derwin of the Brush Junkie channel to report on mostly the Lahaina fire, but then we started seeing other fires. So like in early 2024, there was the Chile fires, and then there was the Texas Smokehouse Creek fire, which was over 1 million acres, and we had seen anomalies in those. And so we were already keeping our eyes out. And when the LA fire happened, it definitely sparked our interest and we started looking into it right away. And we saw a lot of fire behavior anomalies, damage indicators that don't indicate natural fire. By that point, we were already on to the whole 15-minute smart city land grab, plot that has been implicated in some of these fires. And so I right away dug up, and by the time LA happened, other people were already aware of this too. And so they found the plans for Smart LA 2028. And we looked at the the rezoning of the Palisades, which was traditionally, single family residential area, low density, and they were trying to rezone it to mixed use commercial, high density. That's one of the things that I noticed, right away was the plans for a 15-minute city, not just for Palisades, but Altadena as well. And so then we looked at the fire damage anomalies. And I think I did send you a lot of images. We saw a lot of the usual metal melting, the auto glass melting out. But then there were some anomalies that popped up in the LA fires that we didn't necessarily see in a lot of other cases. So a lot of those would be like the steel I-beams, sometimes a quarter to a half inch or thicker, that were actually melting or drooping, and in some cases actually twisting. And I have seen the twisting beams before, but it was a lot more prevalent in the LA fires.
I think there are actually problems when we try to discuss this with people that I've experienced when I try to discuss this with anyone. I'm curious on your side of that. Are there common assumptions that people often bring to these types of fire discussions that block clear analysis?
Yeah, I would say a lot of people are on to the whole climate change narrative. And so, a lot of people tend to think, oh, well, this is climate change. This is because we're altering our environment with CO2 and we're warming the planet and it's increasing the likelihood of wildfires. It's debatable how much CO2 actually affects global temperature, or that the global temperature is responsible for these low relative humidities and high winds that sort of coincide with these anomalous fire behaviors. So I think the climate change narrative is probably one of the biggest hurdles to get over, at least when it comes to people who are more left leaning. Now, when it comes to right leaning people, they are a little bit more open minded when it comes to what you might call a conspiracy theory. But I don't like to actually use that word because it is kind of one of those things that can halt discernment. And it's kind of used like an ad hominem to attack the person instead of the argument, and it shuts down, inquiry. So I would say climate change is probably one of the big ones there. But another thing, there's also false dichotomies between the sources of ignition, which are not mutually exclusive, like arson versus down power lines versus directed energies. And some people have it in their mind that all lasers are in the visible spectrum, and that's not actually true. There are a large number of infrared lasers, which are outside of the visible spectrum, and that would probably be the most likely spectrum to use if you're like a military organization that wants plausible deniability. You would want to use something that's outside of the visible spectrum. But to backtrack a little bit for the LA anomalies, there was some video that was captured by one of the Malibu residents named Alec Gellis. And he was actually in the Malibu Franklin fire just the fall before the LA fire. And he actually had to defend his house with a hose. And he was filming that there was like the palm trees in his backyard. There is a video that was taken by Alec Gellis as he's watering down this palm tree. You can see at the top of the palm tree, right where the fronds come out, there's like an ignition point in this tree where it just kind of sparks up and starts on fire. And you can see that there's no actual embers that made contact. And there's actually almost very little, almost no wind at the time as well. And so that actually happened the fall before LA. And he actually did save his home in the Malibu Franklin fire. But then when the Palisades fire came, he actually lost that home. So, yeah, that was just one other thing I wanted to point out as well.
Here's what I see is that often when I'm having a discussion about this type of topic, there seems to be completely close to 0% openness to anything other than the official story of its embers, and it was all the grasses and burning material, and that was enough to burn everything, and it was all just completely normal and explainable fire. And also the idea that all fires are normal and explainable, like especially like all fires that are hitting close to home, at least these ones that we're discussing, like LA, Maui, going back to Paradise, and everything we've just mentioned so far, even 9/11. That the problem is evidence doesn't show that. And again, I am talking to Shane Buell, author of Sound the Alarm, the Maui disaster that sparked a global awakening, this book here. And this is something that you actually took time to look at in depth and calmly. And whenever I'm talking with someone about a topic, I try to track to see where are they at regarding, are they curious about this topic in the first place? And if they are afraid, that often shuts down curiosity. Are they flexible? It means, can they entertain different ideas? Like flexible, like yoga with the body, flexible with your mind, with someone's mind. Do they have humility? That doesn't mean humiliation. Do they have the humility to acknowledge, I have been wrong in the past. I could be wrong with my conclusions right now. Can they say I could be wrong right now? Can they say I'm probably going to be wrong in the future? Or is the humility muscle kind of like, not so really strong? Do they have
Yeah.
courage to go into this topic? Some people, I can see like that they got that kind of deer in the headlights thing going on where they're just not having any courage to go there. And when those things are happening, when there's no curiosity, there's no flexibility, there's no real acknowledgement of humility, and there's really like a lot of fear and no courage to go forward, I got no real actual reason to continue talking with them because I'm talking with someone who's got issues and they don't want to say that they have issues. I have issues, but I can say that I do. That's the difference, you know?
Yeah. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's always a humility thing. I think whenever, in communications, when we're delivering a message that's too discrepant from the current beliefs of the target audience, then you're going to run into that cognitive dissonance, which is a psychological thing that happens to most human beings when they, hold a belief very strongly. And so I think one way to kind of try to get around that is to try to walk people in baby steps from a position that's a little bit closer to where they're at and then take, incremental smaller steps towards where you're trying to take them. So yeah, a lot of times, you will run into that cognitive dissonance if you present a message that's just a little too discrepant from their current beliefs. And that's natural for all humans, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily a humility thing. It's just a psychological thing.
It is a big psychological thing. And I think certainty, as I've mentioned in a bunch of my shows before, is kind of like a big replacement for strong religious points of view. People are just they would prefer to have a strong certainty on a topic, on saying the Maui fire was 100% natural, the winds were just crazy, they just came through, the electrical fire over there in this whatever electrical substations or whatever was enough to burn the grass and the fire was enough embers to cause all those houses to burn in those weird anomalous ways. And rather than actually look at videography and looking at still images, the whole thing is so upsetting that I see some people avoid actually looking at images and avoid really the whole topic altogether. Do you notice that?
I do actually, and even myself, when I encounter cognitive dissonance, it's very uncomfortable. And I can see the average person, when met with that, would probably go with what they know and stick with what's comfortable.
This is another part here. Um, Evidence over vibes. Okay.
Hmm.
Across the whole Lahaina, Paradise, and LA fires, the damage patterns that most strongly suggest something beyond standard wildfire behavior. The things that would be most strong, like say, this is out of the ordinary. A lot of people will point to and
Okay.
say, "Oh wow, check out these blue cars and check out these blue umbrellas and things like that."
Mm,
But there's a lot more than
right.
that.
There's a lot more than that. And besides just the melting metals and glass and things like that, we have noticed one thing that I think is a sure sign of unnatural fire behavior is the proximity to metals. So a lot of times we'll see flammable materials that only catch fire in proximity, in very close proximity to metallic objects. I think I did send you a picture of Jesse Wald's fence. So there's a guy who lived in Kahoma Village in Lahaina, and he was another real estate guy. And he actually did take some video and pictures of his property, and you can see that there is a picture of his fence, and he's got some some plants and everything that are around, and the plants are only dried out and they're not burned, but the fence had only burned where the nails are. And we've seen that several times in all the fires, like in California. Forensic arborist Robert Brame, he's made over 100 visits to like 50 plus fires in California. And one of the things he often sees is that things are only burning in proximity to the metals. So like when you look at fence posts that are only burning where the nails are or where the barbed wire is, and you see wooden posts for the guardrails are only burning where the bolts are inserted. You see a lot of effects like that that doesn't look natural. And to me, that could be a sign of electromagnetic induction, whereby electromagnetic frequencies such as microwaves, when they interact with metals, they will induce eddy currents that cause resistive or joule heating, which will radiate, and it could ignite the adjacent objects, but radiative heating actually obeys the inverse square law, and it drops off rather dramatically with distance. So I do think that could be very likely possibility of what we're seeing when it comes to the proximity to the metals. I'm not necessarily saying that it is microwaves, because there are other possibilities. So when it comes to directed energy, I would say that some of the effects that we're seeing could be attributed to microwaves. Some can be attributed perhaps to plasma, and some actually could be contributed to the Hutchison effect, which is something that I've only recently started like applying to the evidence. But we can get into the differences between those if you like.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I wrote down plasma because I'm unfamiliar with plasma potential weaponry, but I am familiar with looking at the Hutchinson effect because that's a huge basis of, I would say, what best explains the 9/11 2001 anomalies.
I
That's
would agree with you when it comes to 9/11. I would say that that's too big of a job for just lasers or microwaves. Now, I'm not sure about collimated plasma, but when it comes to the dustification that we see of the large steel beams, and I think I did send you a link to one of Judy Wood's presentations where she actually shows one of those steel beams in free fall, not colliding with any other objects, but during the free fall, you can see it go from solid to like dust. And so to me, the only likely candidate that I know of to produce that type of effect would probably be the Hutchison effect.
that's what I was thinking too. And for those who are watching and listening, this is going to be a very visual show. So like Spotify and like iTunes listening, you're gonna want to be like maybe get curious and go back to watch some of this stuff. Like watch what say John Hutchinson does in his laboratory and to get various types of metals to start smoking and then like literally be shrinking and becoming like, so in other words, pieces of the metal starts to become smoke. That's in a laboratory. It's a laboratory effect under video. You can question whether it was valid or not. And then actually very valid, watch various different angles of say the radio antenna and other pieces of the World Trade Center towers 1 and 2 structure falling, but the video slowed down, really slow it down, and watch it like getting tired of being a solid object anymore and sort of trailing into dust until it becomes literally not seeable anymore. And again, there's that whole thing, 9/11 and such. That's a fascinating anomaly. But here's a different question. This is what people always bring up. They bring up the wind, topography, and the fuel loads. I mean, how can any of that explain what burned? And then where does that explanation fail regarding what fuel loads were available? I'm figuring that this is in the book that I didn't read yet. Like, but what was available and where does that explanation fail?
Okay, so yes, it actually does somewhat accurately describe. So, every firefighter is going to tell you that, topography, fuel load, wind speed and direction, as well as relative humidity will all affect fire behavior. And so we do see evidence of, wind-driven combustive flames, but where I guess we get into problems is, the various different types of ignition sources. So on Maui, is when it comes to Lahaina, we have found evidence that there were power lines that fell down and caught grass on fire, and then that grass fire was spread by the wind. But then also on the south end of Lahaina near Puamana, right at the edge of the highway, there was a couple of spots that looked like they were arson points. And this was found by the Maui Community Investigation, mostly Paul Delorier and Bruce Douglas, who were on scene, and they found what appeared to be arson points right at the side of the highway. But then there is also other types of ignitions that don't seem to have an explanation with, like, say, cars in the middle of a parking lot with no fuel load around them. It's very unlikely that an ember would infiltrate a car well enough to actually completely burn all of the flammable materials in the car. And then you also did mention the blue items as well. And that actually is not a blue herring, as some people like to say. There are certain interactions that could be explained by lasers. And one example that I like to give is the tattoo removal clinics. If you were to go to a tattoo removal clinic to remove a color tattoo, they often start with a 1064 nanometer infrared laser, which is invisible. And that removes almost all of the colors except for blue, green, and red. Now, I've been keeping an eye out ever since, Lahaina. And then when Chile happened, just a few months after Lahaina in early 2024, I saw those same colors again that were surviving in conditions that they probably should not have. And so I kept digging a little bit more, and I found out that, yes, that particular wavelength of laser in the, I guess, near infrared spectrum is actually not very good at removing blue, green, and red. And so when they at the tattoo removal clinic, when they remove the main body of colors, those are the ones that remain behind. And then in order to remove red, they have to switch to a 532 nanometer green laser, which actually is in the visible spectrum and would perhaps give up the plausible deniability of being actually used if it was used as a weapon. So in blue and green, actually, so blue is the least interactive color with light, and comic book artists and animators, they often use a certain type of blue pencil called non-photo blue, and that is the color that actually is less likely to show up on their graphic arts cameras because it is the least interactive color with light. And many shades of green are made with blue. And I do think that's one of the reasons we often see blue, green, and red surviving these fires. Now, there is that miracle home that's on the south end of Lahaina that actually did survive, and it had a red roof. So, blue isn't necessarily the only color that is going to survive, an infrared laser. Now, I do believe that, there was probably, and the people that live on Maui also believe that there was more than one type of platform of directed energy that was used. And so I have spoken with the Maui Community Investigation about what they think. And they think that, there was plasma, that there was microwaves. And I also do think that there was lasers involved. And one thing I would point to is a 2002 patent titled Microwave Transmission using a laser-generated plasma beam waveguide. And that sounds kind of complex, but what they do is they use a pulse laser, which its only purpose is to ionize the air particles through which it travels, which creates, it's called plasma, but any sort of charged particle, whether it be a positive charge or a negative charge, is technically like a plasma. And so it creates this temporary plasma conduit within the atmosphere. And I do believe this would have to be an atmospheric-based platform if that's the one that was used, because it does require air particles to actually create the charged plasma conduit that would then contain the microwaves. So there is a patent that actually shows like a ring of lasers arranged into a ring formation that creates a tube, and then they pump microwaves through that tube. It initially was proposed for power transmission or long-range communications, but it does also say that it could be used as a weapon. And I do think a lot of the signatures that we see, especially with the color coding of the objects that survive when they probably shouldn't, it does look like there is some sort of optical waveguide being used, or laser, to actually channel the microwaves into a smaller area, because microwave radiation typically spreads out in like a conical or divergent beam. But if you're able to trap a microwave within a tubular laser beam, then you can actually direct it much farther with less signal loss. You can have much better targeting with less collateral damage. However, I think that one of the things that we do see that kind of points toward microwaves also being used, like I said, is the induction effects, um, where we see the proximity effect of things burning near metals. I do think that is a sign of microwaves being transduced into electrical current through the metals. So the signs when I see, like, the blue items and the proximity to the metals, it kind of points me in the direction of a laser guided microwave in some cases. Now, there are other cases that could be collimated plasma, and there are other examples that could also be the Hutchison effect. And so I don't think it's just one size fits all. I think that there is probably a smorgasbord from which they have to choose, and Maui may have been a test bed where they tried all of the above.
If you were going to insert into the show photographic or video evidence that you consider is the most difficult for authorities to just explain away, what would it be that you'd put in right here, right now?
I guess just off the top of my head, I would point to the blue car that was at the intersection of Front Street, and right there in front of Tommy Bahama's, right in front of those blue umbrellas, was also a blue Ford Escort that was surrounded by pretty much complete devastation and right next to cars that were completely burned out. However, there is one particular video, which I took a screenshot of, where the hazard lights were still blinking on the car. So it indicated that not only was the electrical system of the car still functioning, but it could probably have been started and driven away as well. So the fact that survived so well in that environment kind of indicates to me that the blue definitely had something to do with it.
Pretty compelling evidence to most people. All you have to do is like look at it in the same way as the way we looked at the 9/11 videography. Take a moment, slow the videos down frame by frame, make it slower, zoom in and take a look. I mean, that's like a big chunk of it. But did you know that there were fires on the Big Island at that same time as Maui? Were you aware of that? Yeah,
I did.
sounds like
I
yeah.
was aware of that, yeah. And there
And
was other fires on Maui as well.
and there were other places where it was on fire as well. But
Hmm.
since it's on island, I actually visited it way after the fact, after they'd already chainsawed and removed a bunch of those charred trees, but their stumps are there, right there near Spencer Beach Park, and like on the way to a place called Maui Beach over there, and Maui is one of my favorite beaches on the island here, and this is one of those weird anomalous things where you look around, it's rocks and dust. And, there's a few trees on the edge of the water. That's what was burnt, basically. But there's just really
Hmm.
not much to burn, basically. We're talking a real close to the fields of lava, the lava fields close to where there's just nothingness. And I'm, remembering my time over in Maui where it's also there's maybe a few strands of grass here and there and a few lone trees here and there, the ones that can handle the desert conditions of that side of the island. For people who are not familiar, when you're on the west side of these islands, the side away from all the moisture, it's a desert. There's just nothing there. It's all very, very dry. Now, you could be saying, oh, but that makes everything easier to burn. Yes. But then we're going into all these anomalies. We just said, what's the temperature needed to incinerate a toilet?
Oh, about 3,000 for porcelain. And
3,000 degrees. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a lot of degrees. And how much grasses, just grass, and plus add maybe a few trees involved would needed to be, to create that type of 3,000 degree incineration, plus also the 2,500 degrees for auto glass. Like, what's the
Yeah,
clarity?
autoglass starts to melt at 2,500. However, grasses only burn at a few hundred. I would say maybe 600 max. You might be able to get some grasses to burn up to about 900, but you're not going to really get close enough to actually melt aluminum with just grass fire. And one thing that you did mention, so on the leeward side of Big Island, you were talking about these trees that are near the water, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of a fuel load in close proximity to them that would expose them to combustive flames. So it does seem weird that those trees would actually have ignited. And I often do, and Robert, the forensic arborist, has also noticed that most of the trees that burn are also in close proximity to water. And I don't know if you actually got a good look at the trees, but a lot of trees are burning from the inside out. Actually, they do appear to be combusting and on the inside first and then burning to the outside. And to me, that might also be another sign of perhaps microwaves, because the highest water containing trees are usually the ones that burn first. And water is a polar molecule. And in the presence of an electromagnetic field like microwaves, water molecules will oscillate about 2.5 billion times per second, which creates a lot of frictional heating that can also cause ignition. And so I don't know if you got a good look at those trees, but a lot of them may have been burned from the inside.
Unfortunately, I didn't because, like I said, by the time I got there, they already chainsawed them up and removed them. So I have a bunch of charred stumps there, really.
Well, a stump is a stump would still provide good evidence if you could actually get close enough to the stump to see if the inside of it is hollow, while the outside is still intact.
Okay, next time, I'm gonna take some photos of that. And for
All right.
sure, I'm gonna aim to get over to Maui to see what can be seen. What I think we've seen so far is we have a lot of anomalies that are not explained by normal fire. And I think you kind of have to be purposefully against rational discussion and investigative. This is a forensic crime scene we're talking about. And a lot of it is now caught on video and caught in still pictures and images that are not going away, that are widely shared, that are going to be shared on this show. This is a crime scene, and we're capturing like kind of more of the, as it starts, the what happened. What happened is these certain things burned. I believe we have houses that were incinerated all the way from like the roof all the way down to the foundation. Like that's the concrete part. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of incineration. That is not your normal kind of brush fire, as well as like
Yeah,
not a single toilet left. Then you have the anomalies, right, Shane, of like people, incinerated in cars. You have any images of that? All right. That's
I
confirmed.
do actually. I can send you that as well. I know YouTube is a little bit strict about showing that kind of stuff,
We have other
but I do
channels
have
for
it
this.
available.
That's what this is for. It's going up there
Yeah.
on the Rumble, the BitChute, the Odyssey, the Brighteon, archive.org, and Substack, where
Hmm.
we are not censored there. So yeah, I want to include that right here. Or-
Yeah, so I guess one of the most viral videos that you might have seen would be the video that was taken on Front Street, where there was, I believe it's perhaps an African American woman who's laying face down on the pavement, and she's charred black almost completely on the outside, and some of her calf muscles are missing, like is burned to the bone, but the hair is actually still intact. So she's actually got cornrows that are still intact, and you would expect the hair to actually burn first before the other bodily materials. So to me, it almost looks kind of backwards, because hair and even on trees, palm trees, you would expect the leaves to go first, but a lot of those just end up drying and withering out, but actually not combusting. When it comes to bodies, there are also animals that have been found. You may have seen the frog that was basically hollowed out. It was just like the solid skin of a frog, and it was like hollow on the inside, and it was like, pretty much solidified. There was even a cat that was found in mid stride, still standing while it was taking a step, as if it had just like frozen there that way. And it was burned in a similar way to the frog and to the woman, but it's really strange that, it looks like it was frozen mid step with its tail up and everything as it was walking. To me, things like that are very strange. And we do have, I will send you that video of the body on Front Street. And there are also, if I can find it, I will try to send you another video of human bodies that were seen in Lahaina. Some of them, the burn patterns look anomalous. Like some of the clothing is burned in a straight line. And like there's this one person who's laying on the street and there's like their ribs are like hollowed out, but there was no actual fuel because they're just laying in the street. It doesn't look like there was a fuel load to actually cause that type of burn pattern.
I'm curious about what is the phenomenon called columnated plasma? What does that mean?
Ah, okay, so that was actually something that I was introduced by an ex Lockheed employee who actually lives on Maui now. His name's Larry, and he does work for the Maui Community Investigation. I actually had an opportunity to pick his brain when it comes to the differences between lasers and plasma and things. And he does think that a lot of the damage that he saw on Maui was caused by what he calls collimated plasma. So if you think of plasma as being sort of like a lightning bolt, it travels in a similar fashion. However, you can actually narrow it down into a very narrow, I guess you would call it bolt, as opposed to beam. It doesn't necessarily travel in a straight line like lasers would, but it can be directed to do so if a laser is used. So like I was saying, the laser generated plasma beam is electrically conductive, and electrically conductive materials, including ionized air, can reflect microwaves, but they can also conduct plasma as well. And so you might have heard about guided lightning bolts and things like that. So I don't know that a laser or, a plasma conduit is necessary to guide one of these. We have seen, like in the case of the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, or HARP, where they can actually poke holes in the ionosphere and allow the charged particles in the magnetosphere to find a pathway to ground. And so that would probably take the path of least resistance unless it was directed in some sort of way. But there are ways to take like a plasma or an electrical differential or electrical gradient and channel it to a specific spot. And it would usually do so through an electrically conductive pathway. However, this ex-Lockheed employee, he says that they have lots of different ways to direct and collimate plasma alone. It's hard to say whether, we're looking at some sort of AC microwave induction or whether we're looking at some sort of DC plasma seeking ground. It's hard to say. There might be slight differences between those, as well as differences between the Hutchison effect. There are certain examples that I would give that point more towards the Hutchison effect, like the cracking of the steel beams and things. I will send you a photo from a recent California fire where there was a boat that was on kind of a trailer, and the frame of the trailer was a steel beam, like an I-beam, that had cracked. To me, I couldn't really explain that, and could not explain that with the laser or the microwave explanation. And so we perhaps could be looking at some sort of collimated plasma or Hutchison effect in that case. And I would say that if anyone does have a sample of metal material that could perhaps have experienced the Hutchison effect, I would suggest to contact Bob Grenier. He's the director of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, and he has analyzed several of the metal samples directly from John Hutchison, and he has found certain things that are attributed only to the Hutchison effect, such as the existence or presence of magnetic monopoles embedded within the metals themselves. Magnetic monopoles were theorized to not exist. However, the proof of their existence by Bob Grenier has really opened the door to this whole idea of, scalar interference, which is what I think could be causing the Hutchison effect. So it does appear that John Hutchison was using some sort of electrostatic gradient in his lab, but he also had to use a Tesla coil to reproduce this effect as well. The emissions of a Tesla coil are not as widely known to the public. It's not just electromagnetic, but there is also another spectrum that is emitted by Tesla coils, and it is a longitudinal magnetodielectric spectrum, often called scalar waves. And when we have interference between one scalar wave and another, you can see effects like the Hutchison effect. All kinds of, plasma effects can occur from that as well. However, I do think that there is something unique about the way John Hutchison was producing his Hutchison effect using Tesla coils and electrostatic gradients. I don't fully understand how he was able to produce his effect, but I do think it does absolutely require a Tesla coil or some other way of emitting a scalar beam.
Question I think is going to pop up because I'm into the narrative control index of how do I
Mm,
look at that's like the work of Chase Hughes and
yeah.
how do I understand what's going on around narrative? And like I'm not a true believer about almost anything. So that means I need to find a way to falsify things. If I can, if there is a way, what would you say, what evidence would decisively falsify the idea that a Hutchinson effect, that microwave type destruction, that laser type destruction that we've covered so far, or collimated plasma, has not like basically some way to falsify those hypotheses? Is there anything that would do that for you?
Yes, actually there is. So, I would say that many of the ignition points actually are consistent with the official narrative, of power lines and or arson. But I would say that evidence that completely natural phenomena can reproduce the effects that are being attributed to directed energy, along with evidence that ionospheric heating was also not actively involved in directing not natural solar plasma at the time. So I would say that we would have to see proof that perhaps solar flares all by themselves are capable of doing such things. You may have heard of an event in 1859 called the Carrington event. There was an extremely large solar flare which did cause, I don't know if it would be called electromagnetic induction. I think it was probably just plasma conduction that was happening through the power lines where the extra charge was trying to seek ground and it found its way through the power lines or the telegraph lines at the time. And a lot of the telegraph operators actually got shocked. There was reports of even telegraph machines that were still powered on even while unplugged. There is the possibility that solar flares can start fires, but we would have to see proof that it could reproduce all of the effects that we've seen, the color coding of the effects, the proximity to metals, and some of the effects on metals, not just like the warping and the cracking that might be attributed to the Hutchison effect, but another effect that I've noticed along with the metals is what I call rapid oxidation. So there's been a lot of cases where we've seen directly after a fire, like within 24 to 48 hours after a fire, we see metal surfaces that are oxidized way more than they would be in that amount of time. And to me, that indicates perhaps some sort of electrolysis is taking place, which is stealing electrons from the metals and causing an oxidative state to occur much faster than it would naturally. And so I think we would have to see evidence that natural phenomenon like a solar flare or something similar would be able to produce all of that on its own. And we would also have to prove that, if there was solar plasma present in the magnetosphere at the time, that it also was not directed with the use of like ionospheric heating and so forth.
Have you looked into anomalous fires across history? We're talking about you look up every single United States city and just put in your search engine Great Fire of, like Great Fire of New York,
Yes,
Chicago, um, you know,
Jacksonville.
Charleston, San Francisco,
Hmm.
what would be Seattle, just you name it, just name any city and then just put Great Fire of and you'll find it. And it makes me
Yeah.
wonder, so you've looked into this topic and please go ahead, speak to it.
I think I first got caught on to this idea when I saw Stu Peters talking about the old world fires. and they do present a lot of evidence from not just the Great Fire, the 1871 Chicago fire, but they also go into a lot of detail with other fires. And the one that really got me was the Jacksonville 1901 fire, where there was reports of people who had escaped the fire and they were viewing from over 100 yards away, and metal objects in their pockets would like spontaneously combust, like their stopwatch would spontaneously combust in their pockets, and they're over 100 yards from any combustive flame whatsoever. And then, there were other reports of them hopping in a taxi cab to get away. And as the cab is pulling away, they're like a block away from the fire and things are still spontaneously combusting. So to me, that's definitely not evidence of normal fire behavior, because I can't imagine how natural fire would even behave in such a way. Yeah, those old world fires, they do go way back to at least 1871. And I would say that perhaps even as far back as the Mahabharata, with the three cities of the Vrishis, the Andakas and the Vrishis, that were, destroyed in a similar fashion. There's a whole entire science called meltology, I believe, that actually looks into some of these ancient old world structures and how they could have been, deformed like they were. They often see bricks and rocks and things like that that look like they were melted. So yeah, it could go back to at least, 1871, if not 3 or 4 thousand years.
Right on. Hey, I got my friend Arrow here from on Island, and Arrow, go ahead. And this is Shane Buell. He's the author of Sound the Alarm, the Maui disaster that sparked a global awakening. This book here. Who are you, and what questions do you have for Shane?
Aloha. Thanks for having me.
Aloha.
Nice to meet you, Shane. Appreciate the work that you're doing.
Oh,
In
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Mahalo.
yeah. Um, well, I went to Lahaina myself after the event. I was there about 3 weeks afterwards. Some of the things that I found made some other videos that ended up in some other clips. So if you ever saw a clip about a toad,
Yes, that's you.
that's me.
I recognize you now. Yes. That's awesome. So you were there with Michelle Melendez.
She interviewed me back here on Big Island, but I was there
Oh, okay.
with another group of people, and it was just kind of fate the way it happened. I ended up getting invited in to go to one of the resource centers, actually the only one in Lahaina. Everything else had gotten moved outside, and so there's a few people that weren't burned out on the Mauka side of town,
Mhm.
Lahaina Luna, and so I ended up meeting a lot of really great people there, including like the state representative Ellie Cochran,
Oh,
um,
yes.
who had a lot to say about it. But they had me helping deliver resources and supplies and watching over everything at night. So I don't know how that happened, but I just ended up really close to the scene and happened to be looking around on the other side of the fence, and that's where I happened to find that toad. And really interesting thing about it is there was melted metal, not very far away. That there was a stand of grass that was as tall as me that hadn't burned down
Mhm.
in between it. So that was, very interesting. So yeah, I happened to see and learn of a lot of things there, and that clip ended up in a little documentary called Old World Order, where it goes back and starts talking about these things happening a lot longer than we've conceptualized, because we've been taught this very linear timeline of man coming out of the cave. I haven't heard your whole conversations about what specific timelines or anything you've been talking about, but yeah.
Well, it seems you've jumped in at the perfect time because we just did mention the toad and the old world fires, and that's when you jumped in.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
timing.
So
And yeah, do you have more questions you want to ask Shane or anything around this topic?
um I'm wondering about a couple things that have always really interested me, like how to mitigate certain things about these seemingly diverse timelines, is um, how we kind of had an overlap of history of indigenous culture of native tribes, and at the same time, we seem to have these World Fair buildings happening. So to me, it seems like, well, the reason why the indigenous were exterminated and their books burned because all this information must have been available to some of them, but it's interesting. The lineage today doesn't seem to take into account that kind of timeline. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that kind of anomaly.
I do actually. So in regards to some of the old world fires that we were just talking about, and the fact that it goes back so far, I think that there is an explanation that could perhaps account for some of that. And I think that there has probably always been this adjacent breakaway society that always had the technology and has, kept it hidden for a long time. And every once in a while, they'll come out with some of it, but then every once in a while, there's also a reset, to reset the public population back to a previous level. But I do think that this technology has always existed on some level. And I do think that that's perhaps evidence of a breakaway society, which has existed for a long time side by side, but not out in the open. So I do think whether it be underground or off world or whatever, you want to believe, I do think that there is some sort of adjacent human breakaway society that has preserved a lot of that technology and is also perhaps behind some of the resets when it comes to, human populations having had like advanced technology in the past and then losing it and starting over. So I do think that there is perhaps evidence of a breakaway society that could go back to ancient times.
It seems like in Europe, it seems much more viable to me because there don't seem to be all these native tribes that were all over the place. And so, I'm, you know, interested in knowing, are there legends or stories of like airships in any kind of like native tales, myths and legends or something like that? I have heard stories about battles between kind of reptiles, birds, dragony kind of things in the Pacific Northwest. Um, and there is a lot of dinosaur bones, quote unquote, out in eastern Oregon. So yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, like maybe if you've come across anything in any other indigenous myths and legends that kind of speak to any of these kinds of World Fair airships cruising by.
None off the top of my head, although I do think during like medieval times, there are several paintings that depict what would be considered like UFOs or UAPs. And I would once again perhaps point back to the Vedas and the Mahabharata, which depicts like some sort of, warfare, aerial warfare between a very advanced civilization and a lot less advanced civilization. And I do think that that mismatch has occurred several times throughout history, where you have like a very advanced civilization, it just wipes out one that's a lot less advanced. I don't have any good examples off the top of my head, though.
Yeah, we're gonna pivot right back to this topic of anomalous fires. But Errol, I want to really say I'm grateful that you saw what I posted on the Facebook. I'm grateful that you showed up and asked some questions. And I'll go ahead. I give you one last question for Shane. You got it?
What's your next book that you're writing about?
I actually had not planned on writing that particular book at the time. So I was pulled into that book. So that book had already started being written before I became involved. And so then I was brought in for probably the last 6 months or so of the writing of the book. And it was quite a labor of love, I would have to say, because I was passionate about it. But, I was juggling a lot of other things at the time as well. So trying to continue putting out video content on the Brush Junkie channel, as well as finding time to write the book. It's you almost have to almost go into like a hermetically sealed, block out the rest of the world. Because like for me, I work best in like 2 or 3 hour increments where I can actually get some momentum going. And writing a book, this is the first book I've ever written, and I was juggling lots of other things at the time. And so it was, I had a lot of late nights trying to make the deadlines and things like that for the publisher. If I ever do write a book again, it would be something that I would have to probably go away, like maybe disappear onto, Maui or something, and then just tune out the outside world for a little while so that I can actually focus on it. Um, there are some subjects that I've thought about writing about. Not necessarily all of them are involving directed energy, but I have toyed with the idea of expanding on directed energy. So I want to try to categorize all the different types of directed energy, what they are, how they're produced, and perhaps countermeasures and stuff. But it would be a very technical project that would involve a lot of research. And so I would have to kind of cloister myself into like a hermetically sealed container for an unknown amount of time. However, I am also, involved in political, not necessarily geopolitical, but more like political philosophies and things of that sort. And I do think that some of that is probably also relevant to the world events that we're seeing today, especially here domestically in the United States. So I would perhaps expand on directed energy as well as political philosophy and how it applies to current events. But writing a book is a big project, and I don't have plans to write any full-length books anytime soon. However, I might actually write some longer articles or something instead of a full book. Yeah, a book is a huge commitment. I never realized how big of a project it is until I actually tried to do it.
Yeah, right
Yeah,
on.
and
Well, thank you for that.
and
It was good to meet you, Arrow, and
Yeah.
I'm
yeah,
really glad to meet you, the person who started the whole viral toad video.
It was
really,
my
thank you.
just doing my due diligence as any man ought to do. So
Right on. Thank you
All
so much
right,
for your service. Looking forward to
yeah,
catching you here on the Big Island again.
thank you guys.
mahalo.
Yeah, right
Well, that
on.
was a
So,
treat. That was a
yeah,
pleasant surprise.
isn't it awesome? Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
things that are just unknown that we're going to experience here. So, this Arc 4 in this show, narrative control, incentives, consequences. This is kind of mission critical. I know you spent the
Mm.
time looking over all the questions, you spent the time even formulating answers, but who benefits the most financially, politically, territorially from the official explanations of these fires?
Whew. Well, yeah, I would say that those who benefit most are probably the large landowners like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, who are acquiring more land, in this process because they're swooping in like vultures and scooping up the land at pennies on the dollar. And these people who are longtime generational, perhaps even natives who live on the island for many generations, they're in a situation where they're paying mortgage on a property that they can't even live on. And that's only sustainable for so long. And the BlackRock billionaires can hold out until those people can no longer afford a mortgage on an empty lot, and they eventually do have to sell. And so we do see a lot of the large landowners that are benefiting from this, but as well as the smart city developers and contractors and private public partnerships with short-term rental contracts between like Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, and there's even a company called Lima Charlie, which has taken over most of the leases and everything there. And there's been a whole short-term rental crisis on Maui as well. They're trying to ban short-term rentals. So DHS is actually paying way inflated prices on a lot of these leases and stuff that they're covering, and that's actually just raising the rates for everyone else as well because it increases the average. And so if they ever decide, and I think pretty soon here in February, a lot of those leases are going to be up. People on Maui are going to be displaced once again, looking for places to live. And now the housing market is completely inflated, sometimes 150 to 200+% of what used to be market value prior to the fire. And so I would say, yeah, the landowners, the smart city developers and contractors, and ultimately the UN 2030 agenda benefits from this because, a lot of this smart city 15-minute, city development has been done in lockstep with the UN's plans. And so the UN Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 are all about, limiting our consumption, controlling our, freedom of movement and things like that. So I think those are the ones who benefit the most from this. It's basically a top-down benefit structure, sort of a pyramid with people at the bottom just getting crushed.
That's familiar to me. And how do you think labeling inquiry, like what we're doing as conspiracy, functions as a narrative containment tool rather than a rebuttal? How does that work, do you think?
Well, one way is that it limits people's ability to discern for themselves because it limits the possibilities, right? So if you're only limited to possibilities that are not going to be considered conspiracy theory, then it takes some of the choices off of the table, some of the choices which actually might be more accurate ones. It misrepresents sincere inquiry as merely conspiracy, and calling one a conspiracy theorist for legitimate inquiry, in my opinion, is an ad hominem that attacks the person and not their argument. It kind of shuts off the debate before it can even get started.
Yeah, that's what I get to see. And I think we already covered parallels between the anomalous fires of recent times and other historical events. Seriously, if the public were to be genuine about investigating these anomalies, what do you think the downstream implications would be for, say, governance and accountability and how things would play out?
That's a good question. Um, I think we're already starting to see the public investigate things like stratospheric aerosol injection and its role in solar radiation management, as well as cloud seeding, chemical ice nucleation, and other types of weather modification, colloquially called chemtrails. However, there's several different methods of application and different reasons for doing that. And I think it has the downstream effect of becoming a public conversation regarding state governance over stratospheric aerosol injection and things of the like. Although state jurisdiction ends at around 2,000 feet of altitude, and states are essentially powerless to enforce accountability over the feds. And I think a similar thing is happening in the realm of fire anomalies, and the implications for governance and accountability are even more shrouded in plausible deniability. But the implications for infrastructure are twofold. One is that they occasionally make local political victories, whether permanently defeating smart city plans like they did in Perez Zeledon, Costa Rica, or temporarily defeating land grab bills like Hawaii Senate Bill 3381 and California Senate Bill SB 549. And another is that people may learn some ways to adapt physical countermeasures to help protect life and property. And that is some of the research that is ongoing with me. I'm looking at, countermeasures and so forth. However, it's going to take a lot of resource, for the average person to build and develop countermeasures for directed energy or even just to fireproof your home against normal combustive flames. Some of the things that I have noticed, however, is that Kahoma Village in Lahaina had actually survived, and it was mostly attributed to the underground power lines and the hardy fiberboard cement siding. A lot of that actually will make a difference in a natural fire, and I think it's good to cover all of your bases. So I do think some of that is the downstream implications that we will perhaps see from that.
This is a different question, but it's relevant to what I already gave you ahead of time before the show. Did you get to document ways that insurance companies and governments and any other organizations seemed to like that there were evidence to show them aligned in containing the narrative, in shutting down discussion? Did you actually get to document them doing that?
Let's see here. So there is some evidence before the fact of insurance companies actually stocking up on adjusters. So there was a company called Mile High Adjusters, which had put out ads in several job websites that were looking for insurance claims adjusters for Lahaina. They were looking for over 60 plus insurance claims adjusters for the city of Lahaina, and they were hiring urgently, they said. And that was as of April of 2023. So that was just 4 months before the fire. So they seem to have anticipated a need for extra insurance claims adjusters. But then once the damage actually happened, they have basically blamed everything on Hawaiian Electric Company. So the HECO down power lines basically became the scapegoat. They're trying to claim that HECO is liable and it's not a natural wildfire. And so, like, if it was an act of God, if it was actually a natural wildfire, then the insurance would pay out in full. However, a lot of insurance claims are either not being paid out in full or not being paid out at all. And so even the people who are getting insurance money for their property are not getting the full amount to actually rebuild their property. Yeah, like I said earlier, those people can't necessarily, and plus the red tape, the government has implemented a lot of red tape and hoops to jump through, Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA, and everything has to get certified and be totally cleaned up according to government standards. And a lot of times that is being done out of pocket by the homeowner themselves. And so and they can only hold out so long. And then once they do, choose to sell, then it's one of those big investors like BlackRock or even Harpo Studios actually has been behind some of these land grabs. So, when you hear about properties in Lahaina or elsewhere that were fire damaged, sometimes it's not necessarily BlackRock, Vanguard, or State Street. Occasionally you will have an investor like Harpo Studios that comes in. And if anyone's familiar with Harpo Studios, that's owned by Oprah, who does actually have properties on Maui. She has one property on eastern Maui near Hana, but she also has a ranch near Kula, which was actually unaffected by the Kula fires. So there was actually a fire in Kula during the Lahaina fire, just prior to the Lahaina fire. And I think 19 or 20 homes were destroyed in that fire, but Oprah's home was untouched.
Her home and her ranch over there in Kula were untouched by
Yes.
the fires. So
Yeah.
obviously, we don't need to shout out Oprah and seek for any relief monies towards her because she was unaffected, and also she is extremely wealthy, as are many other people who were unaffected by this specific fire. But I was just wondering, are there any specific peeps out there, people who have a GoFundMe or some crowdfunding campaign that you'd like to shout out? People who were devastated by the Lahaina fire, and maybe it's in your book, maybe you know personally that you'd like to say, hey, let's put a link into the show. Audience members can go and check this out, can go and help them.
Yes, I would actually say that off the top of my head, there is one person I know that probably still has their GoFundMe up, and he's a good friend of mine, Brutta Spice on Maui. I think his GoFundMe is titled Island Spice Hawaii. I will link that to you so that you could provide the link in the show notes.
It's going to be right
But
here
yeah,
in
if you
the
go,
video right now. Yeah.
Yeah, so on GoFundMe, Island Spice Hawaii, he's one of the Lahaina victims who lost not only his business but his home as well, and eventually his little dog as well. I think perhaps succumbed from the smoke inhalation. Like, she did live for a while after that, but he lost her soon after. And he's trying to get his business back on track. He's an herbal healer who had like an entire shop full of herbs and all that sort of thing. And he made extracts, and he also makes perfumes. And so we've interviewed him a couple times. He's given us a lot of not only firsthand experience, but some actual really good evidence, not only images, but videos as well. For example, the area where he had his business was a lot of concrete cinder block construction with rebar inside, and a lot of those concrete blocks were exploding away from the rebar. And he actually did provide evidence that showed like how far some of that concrete and rebar was thrown from the source of the, I guess you could call it, explosion. And then there was also the industrial buildings. They were like these metal industrial buildings in there's Emerald Plaza in the industrial zone, just Makai of Lahaina Luna, but Mauka of most of the rest of Lahaina. And so he has provided a lot of good corroborating evidence. So those industrial buildings were nearby the area where he was fleeing at the time. And so he was trying to run from the fire. And he's probably about a block out in front of the fire. The fire front is probably about a block away. And as he's running past these buildings, they're actually like imploding or crushing inwards. And he was the one that actually sent me this picture of a garage door on one of those buildings that's twisted like a rope. And I thought that was really strange. We have seen, I-beams that are kind of twisted and drooped, but this garage door was like twisted into like a licorice stick almost, or a rope-like structure. And to me, that's almost evidence of the right-hand rule in electromagnetics, where the direction of the current determines the curl of the magnetic field. And the curl of the magnetic field, in that case, could have perhaps determined the curl of the metallic door itself. Now, I haven't been able to rule out other effects like the Hutchison effect or plasma conduction. Those are also possibilities. But either way, that is not something you would see in a normal combustive fire.
And by the way, I know that people like here on the Big Island and Maui know the terms Mauka and Makai. But, for the folks who are far, far away and don't speak Hawaiian and know these Hawaiian common words, Mauka means towards the mountain and Makai means towards the ocean. So there were Makai events for the Lahaina fire of people seemingly cooked in their cars like 50 feet away from the water, which is anomalous, meaning like that they didn't get a chance to just normally, like fire's on its way, your car's shut down for some anomalous reason, you'd get out of the car and run and just jump in the ocean. But they were there incinerated in their cars. There's evidence of that. That's the Makai side. Then there's the Mauka events over Kula. I'm sorry, right?
Kula Kula's on the other side. Well, not all the way on the other side, but it's across the valley. However, up the hill, for those industrial buildings at Emerald Plaza, so uphill from Emerald Plaza is where the fire allegedly started. And that's where they found the power station with the down power lines and the original spark of grass or whatever that perhaps was carried by the wind. But I don't think that was the only ignition source that was present.
I would say that sounds accurate. And by the way, fascinating, like to have someone who's done so much investigation and so much time writing a book and still hasn't been to Maui. And, like that's, and that is not to discredit that what you have is not accurate, because I've seen enough firsthand investigative videography right there and talk with people. And we're asking really important questions. Shane, that's part of it. If you were running this whole show, if Made You Think show was yours, what's a question that I didn't ask that you think is important?
I would say, what can we do ahead of time to prevent things like this from occurring? Would be a good question. And just to backtrack real quick, I'll come back to that question. Both of my other co-authors have actually been to Maui. So Tracy has gone to Maui and she has investigated Kula and Lahaina herself. And my other co-author, Stephanie Perucci, she also did go to Maui and she toured Lahaina with the Maui Community Investigation as well. So I'm the only author of the book that has yet to go to Maui, but it is something that I will do eventually. I hope that all the evidence isn't necessarily gone by that time.
Yeah, I don't think it will be.
All right. And so that other question, I guess, what can we do? I would say that there have been, I brought up Costa Rica earlier. So when it comes to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, there are things we can do at the local level to fight these plans. Now, I don't necessarily advocate for political action for the most part. However, there have been examples where political action on the local level has had local victories. And I think the biggest one I can point to is in Perez Zeledon, Costa Rica, where I think it was back in April of, I think it was 24. They had found out about these plans for an eco barrio or 15-minute city that was being planned for their municipality. And they spread the word far and wide, and they got a lot of people to come and give their testimony in opposition to it. However, like so many people showed up and there was huge protests outside of the building that on the day of the vote, when they were supposed to, voice public testimony, they actually had closed the doors and kept everyone outside. Well, there was this one particular journalist from named Dustin Bryce from Interest of Justice, and he's actually a constitutional scholar that had legal paperwork drawn up that was given. So, like, there was a bunch of police standing outside the door in front of this, and I'll give you a video clip of this as well. There was a bunch of people standing outside, trying to get in, but there was a line of police blocking the doors. And then these police were served with these legal papers. And once they saw what they were, dealing with, they realized, well, we have to deliver this to the politicians inside. So they just opened a little crack in the door and slipped the papers through the door. And when the politicians inside actually read the legal paperwork, they realized that they would not be able to actually hold a legitimate vote without giving the opportunity for public testimony. And it was obvious that the public testimony was overwhelmingly in opposition to the 15-minute city plan. They decided not to hold the vote, so the vote was never held. And all of the politicians, except for the mayor, actually backed down and removed their support for the 15-minute city. So right now in Costa Rica, it's pretty much defeated. They've defeated their 15-minute city, and the only one in support of it is the mayor, and he's going to be on his way out because he's very unpopular now because of that. So I would say that was one of the things that we can do. And we've seen examples in Lahaina, for example, the land grab bill, SB 3381. There was a lot of opposition that was voiced to that as well, and it was put on pause for the last legislative session. However, I know they are going to reintroduce it again soon. Hawaii Senator Angus McKelvey has actually started reintroducing some of the bills, like they're actually pushing a water grab bill right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if the land grab bill isn't far behind it. So people on Maui need to pay attention because they will reintroduce that bill again soon, and it will probably go under a different name so that it can fly under the radar.
That's perfect.
So,
I mean, that's kind of like completely exactly where I was trying to pivot in the first place, which is what's the positive things that we can do with all of this information? I touch on stuff, whether here in my other shows, and certainly everything I post on social media, that you could get really depressed and go doom and gloom on all of that if you don't have a way of balancing your internal terrain, your spheres of what's concerning you and spheres of what do you have within your sphere of control, right? Like,
right.
so we have
Mm-hmm.
things that are within our sphere of control, like to pay attention to what's going on. And that's like in terms of, I would say, like totalitarian legislation, like a la 15-minute city stuff, things of this nature of seeing where could be the next electromagnetic anomalous attack. I'm sorry, anomalous fire attack. That's all I have evidence for. These are weird anomalies fires. You don't have porcelain 3,000 degrees. You don't have auto glass 2,500 degrees just spontaneously melting, and people cooked in those weird ways where their cornrows are intact, but the rest of their body is cooked. That doesn't make sense based upon like a brush fire that was caused by HECO, which used to be, by the way, be called Helco, the Hell
Oh,
Company.
really?
Yeah, Hawaii Electric Light Company. And they got
Okay.
rid of the L part, of the
I can
lighting.
see why.
Yeah, branding. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I throw it to you first. It is about the positive things you could do in your life now, both with this information, with your book, and with everything we're talking about, plus just what literally any positive things you could do in your life right now. Just help my Made You Think audience understand. What do you think?
Well, I would say self-sufficiency is a good thing because we're seeing a lot of things going on right now with the government and with the economy. It's going to be good to grow your own food and to perhaps have a source of clean, drinkable water, just for starters. Going off grid and creating your own electricity, that's a huge step. I don't necessarily recommend people try to do that on their own. That's probably going to be like a community type situation. However, when it comes to your communities, like each and every one of us lives within some sort of jurisdiction that is probably planning some sort of plan that is in lockstep with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I would say not necessarily political action, but just to raise awareness, because there is sort of a timeline with these things. So when a certain locality reaches about 80% of compliance with the sustainable development goals is when they accelerate their redevelopment. And there's these things called 5-year plans known as nationally determined contributions. And every 5 years, those are updated. And you do want to try to stay ahead of the game. Like, I'm not telling people to get politically active because I don't necessarily think political action is always going to be the solution. But when it comes to raising awareness and resisting some of these actions, the less compliant that an area is, the slower the timeline of redevelopment will be. And so usually once these localities reach about 80% compliance with the UN SDGs or with the SEGITR Smart Destination Program, which is in Spanish-speaking countries. Usually once they reach about 80% compliance is when those plans are accelerated. Yeah, it's often right after that is when they see some sort of catastrophic redevelopment occur.
Yeah. So those were really good suggestions. Just I especially going to underline the self-sufficiency and sustain your own life, make your own life
Yeah,
stronger and more
self-sustainability and non-compliance.
for sure. Don't comply with things that are totalitarian and make your life more
Right.
sustainable in general. Like that's just lifting up where you're saying, okay, in the there's like a circle. I should see if I could insert that vision, but like a circle of looking at each of the pie slices of your life. Where are you sufficient and where are you doing great? And where do you have areas that you really need growth? For many people, that's finances, needs help. For many people, that's health, needs help. For many people, relationships, that needs help. And like you get to focus on that. That's within your control. I would like refocus that one. But for sure, you can vote with your feet. Some people have the actual capacity, especially if you're single, that you can move. You can go somewhere else. If I was doing it all over and I was single and I wasn't so enamored of living here, of everything that I'm getting by living in East Hawaii on the Big Island, I I would consider moving to Texas or someplace like Tennessee community or things like that. I would consider it because the people who think like me and say things like me and make shows like this, like Made You Think show, they're there. They're doing it. They got Confluence over there. There's for sure the Porcupine Freedom Festival in New Hampshire.
Hmm.
I'm aiming to go there upcoming in a few months time. I'm aiming for all kinds of things. Like I can travel now and do that, but you can vote with your feet. You can do that. Here's something really important for all of you folks who are watching and listening. Did this show disturb you? Then you're the wrong audience. If you can't handle this, if this is like messed up your nervous system for the next hour and for this day, and you don't have a mechanism for getting back to balance, I know people, this is not the show for you. You're doing the wrong thing by consuming this kind of media. I'm making this media and I consume this kind of stuff because I can handle it, because I can face off to it. Similar to I get on the jujitsu mat and I can handle being thrown. That's why I do that. If you can't handle that, don't do that. That's the way it goes. I can just say there's a point to realize what's the impact. There's two things in accountability. Your intentions on the one hand, like what I intended, and the impact. What is the actual result of the actions that go down? For me, Shane, this has been brilliant because you actually did a deeper dive into some of the technology and understanding like things about electrical spin that I have been missing. And I use actual
Mm,
magnets in my holistic healthcare profession, in my actual medical practice. I use magnets. I use
mm,
lasers. I have a hot laser here and cold lasers. And
mm.
I, because acupuncture, we're in the 21st century. I'm not limited just to the needles. I'm not limited just to the herbal formulas. I have all these nutraceutical formulas. I have all these kinds of electromedical tools. We're in the 21st century. There's innovation
Yeah,
that's been happening. So,
yeah.
yeah,
The
all of
infrared
this.
spectrum is actually very healing as well.
Right. You see, like at the very least, if this did disturb you, it could be like, you could go out and get you some of that healthy healing electromagnetic therapies. I'm later on going to be going to far infrared sauna at the spa.
Mm,
That's a
very
thing
nice.
to sweat because it's dry, and it'll probably be 132 degrees inside of there. And for the less electromagnetic, there's also a near infrared sauna. That's where the hot rocks, and
Mm,
also the steam
yeah.
room, which is crazy
Mm.
hot.
Oh, I love steam.
Yeah, the moisture is healing for some, and what I'm saying is there are therapies out there to get yourself back in balance. I keep pushing Breathe with Sandy on YouTube and just do your breathing exercises. I keep pushing that to figure out where it is that you have your sphere of control in your life and be real and honest about it. Like, if you went through all of this whole show and you're like, all right, I'm going to buy Sound the Alarm by Shane Buell, Tracy Derwin, Stephanie Berrucci. I'm going to, I'm going to go ahead and read the whole book. Making a plug for the book that there, Shane. That's important. I'm going to go ahead
Oh,
and maybe take my time, go over this whole show again after it's all uploaded. Look at the images, the ones that are too hot for YouTube, to look at the censored version on the YouTube. Gonna take a look at this stuff. I'm gonna think about things. I'm gonna think maybe a little bit deeper on the Hutchinson effect and potentials for laser technology, and consider where's the crosshairs and where are the danger zones in life. Like, for example, on a wet side of these islands, I don't think they're going to try to frame that as a forest fire suddenly happens, you know, because it's just too damp. And this, like, I live in a place where there's never been a forest fire because it just rains too much. Everything's too soaked all the time. In fact,
well, yeah, that's another problem as well.
it gets people down. That's why they travel to the dry leeward side, the east sides of these islands, so they could just air out. I end the shows of Made You Think to get folks with a positive, impactful place where you could like take agency and action. So just putting my plugs out there.
Yeah. And another thing that I think would fit along with that, you said voting with your feet, and there's also voting with your dollars. So boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning, it actually does have a very powerful impact. And when it comes to voting with your feet, like you said, I've never actually made it out to New Hampshire, the Free State Project where Pork Fest is, but I am rather fond of another one in Michigan called the Midwest Peace and Liberty Fest. Yeah, so if you ever get the chance to make it there, I highly recommend it.
I'm aiming to get out there. And by the way, what's your location, Shane?
The Midwest in Indiana, actually, near Fort Wayne, Indiana. Yeah, Michigan's right across the border from me.
MWP. Yeah, like Midwest
MPLF.
MPLF. Yeah, the
Yeah.
MPLF Fest. Man, I so want to go there. I want to like meet you in person, meet Lucinder Fiend, he was a co-host with us on the Freedom Fiends. To meet
Yeah. Yeah.
to meet all these folks, the cool people that I originally found on Google Hangouts, a group that was started by Wes Bertrand. He had a show called Complete Liberty. I think he actually still has Complete Liberty going, which is amazing, you know. And he brought together all these people who were completely aligned with the concepts of liberty and self-ownership and the non-aggression principle, voluntarism, and the practical applications of nonviolent communication, something that I've been advocating for 15 plus years now, but I advocate it in a different way nowadays. That's all. And I
Yeah.
want to I want to see those people, Katie Testa, all of it, and you guys.
Yeah, I was just about to mention Katie Testa. Yeah, you have a very vocal advocate for nonviolent communication up there. And Lou Fien, he's not only great company, but he is an awesome cook. He's practically a chef, and he will feed you very well.
That he will. There's a lot of cool voices and people to bring back on. Once again, Sound the Alarm, Shane Buell, like that's your book, and really grateful to have you here. We might actually come back and go back into the other topics that we're going into, like looking at a deeper, broader look at history. Wondering if the
Hmm.
Carrington event, what if that wasn't some natural sunspot thing, but that was a similar event as to all these weird anomalous fires that melted all those brick and stone large buildings, that like destroyed.
I could definitely go deep on that one too.
Right. I thought so. And I can too. So, Shane, it's been really brilliant to have a show with you, and looking forward to next time.
All right. Thank you.
Made you think.